give people a few more minutes to show up.
What meetings I attended. No.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I think so. So hopefully it doesn't time out. Okay.
It's kind of a
It's not too bad. We are. We're ready. So. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out for the administrative portion of our RAB meeting tonight.
I think we're ready to start.
All right, so I'll do a quick roll call of participants in the room, and I did want to take an opportunity to introduce one of our new folks from the Army this evening, and we'll introduce again when the formal RAB meeting starts, and then we'll go to the participants online to make sure we account for everybody who's here for this portion of the administrative meeting. So again, my name is Matt Dayock. I am the current co-chair from the Army. And we have Miss Michelle Hopp, who is the community co-chair, and then Valerie McAuliffe, is present. Yes, ma'am. McAuliffe. Mr. Doug Gertson, sorry. I apologize for the butchering of the names. Mr. Roger Heidenreich. Is that correct? Craig Watch. And Mr. Luke Lampo from WDNR, and then Mr. Isaac Ross from WDNR, and then Mr. William Staling, and then Ms. Robin Meyer. And then we've got a couple of representatives from the Army. So I introduced Mr. Quan Nguyen last time. He's our new team lead in the Midwest and Central America Division that replaced Susan Elrod, who departed this past summer. And then Mr. Dwight Holland, this is his first time out. So if you remember Brian Lynch, our environmental support manager, who departed last April, Dwight's come on board with us late November, and he'll be taking Brian's spot. So, Kay, do you mind letting us know who is online, or I don't know if they can speak out to the crowd here?
Laura should be online.
Okay. So Miss Laura Ola's online. And Dennis Hancock, okay. Kurt Sedman. All right. Very good. All right. Well, thank you all for attending. Evening.
Curtis Edmund, BHS.
Okay. Online and here. All right. He's got it pinned down. Well, thanks for attending. I don't think we'll take the whole hour here. Certainly, it's your time and open for discussion. But as you're all aware, the last 2 to 3 RAB meetings, we've done this administrative effort beforehand to really refine the bylaws that were adopted in I think the year 2000 into current operating procedures for the RAB. So we've gone over them in detail the last couple of times. We made a few tweaks at the October RAB meeting, and then we sent those out for review in November based on input from the Restoration Advisory Board. And so intent tonight is to handle, hopefully, we don't have any lingering questions or concerns with the operating procedures, but hopefully adopt those procedures moving forward and kind of get that off our plate and adopt those as the operating procedures for the Restoration Advisory Board. So I guess we'll just open it up. We can go through them, but does anybody have any questions? I think you've all been involved in the process as we've walked through modifying those operating procedures. Okay. Are there any questions online from or concerns about the operating procedures? Just make sure we address all of those if there are any.
Are they in the objections? This is Laura Repository.
We got you, Laura. Yes.
Are they in the repository?
So they're not in the repository yet. Once they're adopted, then yes, they would be put in the administrative or the information repository for the cleanup program at Badger. Laura, did you have a comment? We did hear you, but I didn't hear any specific comment or question.
No, I just said I have no objections to the draft.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, do we have any motion to adopt the operating procedures? All right, Valerie, thank you. So all in favor? All right. All right. Any nays?
You didn't need a second on that, huh?
I'm not real good with Robert's rules. Yeah. We'll take your second. Yes, sir.
Usually they have to have a second.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll second.
Yeah. There we go. All right.
Check your procedures.
Yeah. Yes. Good to know. I'm not usually involved in Robert Rule meetings. So, okay. Well, I think unless I hear anything else, we'll adopt those as the formal operating procedures. And thank you all for your efforts. I know it's been a multi-month effort, and I appreciate everybody's feedback and contribution to establishing these new operating procedures. So we'll stamp a date on it, and we'll get them out to everybody and make those record going forward. Yes, sir.
Are you subject to open meeting clause at all?
No, not like we discussed that last time. There was Wisconsin State open laws meetings, and no, I mean, since this is a federal program, we pretty much operate under CERCLA, and we stick to those. So I don't think there's any Wisconsin laws that are pertinent to this specific RAB.
In your procedures, you have notice of a meeting, correct?
Yes.
That's 30 days, you said?
So, well, the operating procedures actually establish notification criteria. So, in the operating procedures, it says that we shall, we can scroll down to it. I think it's at least 5 days notice, but so those were the changes from last time. Let's see, officers, meetings, yeah. So, scheduled meetings at least 3 times a year, and then, at least 5 days notice. And obviously, we've been, at least the last 3 that I've been to, we've established a recurring schedule. So, the first quarter of the month, the third Thursday, and at the end of the RAB presentation tonight, we've got those dates laid out for the next year. So, so there's notice, and I think our notice for this meeting went out formally on December 17th. So, yeah.
Do you have to establish a quorum at all?
Yes.
Procedure?
Yes, for any voting opportunities. Yes. So, and that's established near the bottom here. And so that was one of the things we went over last time. It is exactly what we want the quorum to be. So, right there.
You have 51%.
So it's defined as 51%, which includes at least one member being present from the community at large, government members, and appointed community representatives. This is going forward. So this technically isn't in place tonight. It's for meetings following this.
And we could meet without a quorum, just not vote.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah. And I know we spent quite a bit of time last time around talking about what a quorum constitutes, and really it's up to you all and what everybody was comfortable with. And this is the verbiage that we came up with that everybody seemed comfortable with. Yes, sir.
Matt, regarding Bill's question about public postings and stuff, it seems to me, I've been coming to meetings for 4 or 5 years, the attendance is dribbling down to like no interest. Our notices going on to our public officials, state representatives, and congressmen and stuff like that, because they used to send representatives. I don't see them anymore.
Yes, they're on the RAB mailing list. I think Calvin, I think if I get the name right, Bobuck, who is one of the congressional staffers, was at our meeting in August, stayed for a portion of it, and it does go out to representatives on the staff within the state. So I think Department of Health Services, some other folks. So there is a broad email list that it hits, but it doesn't go out more broadly than that, I wouldn't say. So if there's someone that's not on that email list and they're not tied to someone that would alert them, then yeah, they probably would not know. I mean, it's on the website. It's published with the meeting minutes, the agenda, future meeting dates, things like that. But
Local newspapers still invited?
we used to publish in local newspapers. Oh, you still do? Okay, good. I wasn't aware of that. I mean, a lot of people don't take the paper anymore. I mean, it's more social media type things, and so we can look into doing a better job. Army Environmental Command recently established like a Twitter page, so I don't know how many people use Twitter, but that's kind of the way of the world these days is social media and getting it out on those forums.
I just feel like we're losing interest.
Mm-hmm.
The community seems to be losing interest. I don't know whether it's by design or whether we're just dropping the ball.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly open to any mechanism you think is appropriate to let more people know. And I mean, we certainly want involvement from the community. It's not we're not trying to tamp that down in any way. But if there's a forum or a mechanism for us to use that you think might be valuable, then please alert us, and we can utilize that.
Could you add Sauk County government to that list, because I don't think they're on the list?
Al's our representative.
Laura?
No, Al's our representative from Sauk County.
Yeah, I'm on County Board member for
Right.
Sauk City, but is the Sauk County government giving notice of these meetings? Because that would be helpful, because all Sauk County supervisors may want to attend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if there's email addresses, certainly you can provide those, and we can add those in a couple minutes to the mailing list. I mean, that's easy. So if there's specific email addresses, we can certainly take those. I don't know if do they have a general email list that okay. To everybody. Okay, that'd be great.
What is that about? Is it SaukCounty.gov, or is it more than that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it goes to that
I can get
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's easy. We can add that to the list, and it doesn't cost anything to add another name to the list, and it'll go out to them. But they'll get all the communication. So they'll get the meeting minutes, they'll get the agendas, they'll get the slide presentation. So that's the forum that we use to send out all information. So we can certainly do that. Okay. The only other topic I think I wanted to address tonight during this portion of the meeting is in regard to the TAP program. So back in August, the RAB formally voted to petition the Army for the TAP program, which is Technical Assistance for Public Participation. So that's a grant-type program that leverages third-party entities to help the RAB understand technical aspects of what the Army is proposing. So they would work on your behalf and provide support to you in understanding any proposed actions we make or review of documents, those kind of things. In all honesty, we have struggled to find someone to provide that service. We've contacted EPA and a number of our partners to try to find. It's a very niche community. It's a small dollar amount. You're allowed to spend $25,000 a year, so there's just limited interest. But the good news is, luckily Joel Jansen got in contact with a professor from University of Madison, Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin at Madison, and so he is interested in providing the service. So we're moving forward in retaining his services. We have to let a contract with him so that there's invoices and things like that to be paid. But we will hopefully have him on board sooner rather than later. And his name, I can give you his name. So his name is Mr. Jim Tingham, and he has a small company called Tingham Consulting. So certainly if you guys can look into it and make sure that that's amenable to your preferences, and if there's anybody else you want us to consider. I think we've asked a couple of times and haven't gotten any suggestions out there, but we've kind of scraped the barrel and didn't come up with much, and EPA didn't have any resources within the state of Wisconsin. We were really looking for somebody who could jump in right away and not have to be familiar with the laws in Wisconsin and groundwater in Wisconsin, those kind of things, and this gentleman seems to be a match for that. So we are moving forward with that. And yes, it is Tinjum. And we have not retained his services yet, so I mean, just for that awareness, and we've reached out to see if he would be interested in providing his services, and he said yes, but we don't have he's not formally contracted. Yes, sir.
So does he contract with you or with us?
He contracts with us because that's where the resources come from. So he contracts with the government. We have a contracting office that we work with. We'll provide a scope of work that basically says he will provide up to $25,000 a year of consulting type services for you all, and then we're kind of out of it after that. We'll manage the contracts and obviously make sure that you guys are getting what we're paying for, but then you all would work with him on any specific questions you have, review of any documents, and then he would sit with you all and explain those in layman's terms, answer any questions, kind of be a third party to look at this and ideally give you guys a comfort level of what we're doing. Obviously, yes, he still is paid by the federal government and the Army, so that you do have that aspect, but for all intents and purposes, he'd be working for you guys.
We could meet with him as a RAB without the Army representative?
Absolutely. It wouldn't be a formal RAB meeting, right? But yeah, certainly you could communicate with him and meet with him as a group and seek his input and his honest feedback on what he's reading and seeing. And if he has any suggestions, you could bring those forward. Absolutely. So, yeah. And that's the purpose of the program. I mean, EPA has something similar. I think they call it a TRC or something like that. But it's to help communities. You guys don't do this. It's not your profession, right? So to help you all get your questions answered and have an advocate on your side that gives you some comfort with what we're proposing.
So as soon as you get Mr. Tingham under contract, you'll notify Michelle so that we can.
Absolutely.
No, this is new to me. But it's good news. Looks like he's a geological engineer. Just looked at him up. And interested in energy analysis and policy. Sounds like he's in the right area.
Yeah, so far he's the only one we've been able to find, but yeah, I did think he was a good find. So, and he was amenable to doing the work. So, any other questions on that? All right. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that
was a good find on his part. Yeah. All right. Well, I think, I'm sorry, I don't want to value your time, and we probably should have set this for 5:30. I just didn't know how the conversation would go with operating procedures and all that good stuff. We have used every bit of our time the last few meetings in this administrative meeting to try to get to where we are now. So we thought it'd be best to reserve an hour for this, but we'll go ahead and break this meeting unless anybody has anything, and then we'll start the formal RAB meeting at 6 p.m. All right. Thanks.
Way down, my brother, what's going on? Way down, why can't you see? You've got to ease out, just to let go. Trouble says stop now, why can't you see? You've got to ease out, just to let go. Yeah, I say I'm sitting, I'm just doing nothing. Waiting, I'm waiting for nothing. We're fighting, and nobody's winning. It's like playing when nobody's dancing. So wait now, why can't you see? You've got to ease out, just to let go. Just stop now, why can't you see? You've got to ease out, just to let go. Like children, we're dancing, we're singing like nothing's the matter. Forgetting our troubles for now and they're going away. I'm laughing.
Introduce everybody who was here for the administrative meeting. If you just joined us for the RAB meeting, you mind raising your hand and just quickly introducing yourself? I think, Charlie, you want to start?
Charlie Wilhelmsen.
Yep. Thanks.
Large member?
John Ellington, Alderman in Bearville.
Mike Gleason, Lake Wisconsin Alliance.
Stephanie Brensky, Administrator for the Town of Merrimack.
Anybody else? I think we did have Miss Mary Jane
Cook, join online as well in the interim. So, all right. Well, thank you all for attending tonight. We've got a number of slides, and hopefully you guys, those went out last week, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to look at those, and we'll certainly entertain any questions you have, but we'll go ahead and press forward because we do have a lot to cover tonight, and just try to use the time the best that we can. So we've done roll call. Again, just thank you for attending tonight. Hope everybody had a great Christmas and a New Year. It's hard to believe it's 2023, but we'll continue to have these quarterly, and we'll talk about those dates at the end of the meeting. Review of minutes, we'll do that here shortly, and then you can see the other topics we've got. Don't want to go into too much detail now, but we'll go through those as we move through the slides here. So it's opening remarks. We've done the roll call and introductions. I think we've covered everybody. And then meeting minutes. So we had the October 20th meeting. We sent out meeting minutes in November, did get a few clarifications on those, and then sent out the final, what we would consider final meeting minutes on December 17th. So anybody have any final comments, questions regarding the October RAB meeting minutes from last year? Okay. Hearing none, we'll go ahead and I think per our rules we don't have to vote on the meeting minutes. We just adopt those and we'll call those final. So thank you all for looking at those, and thank you for those of you that did comment on those. We appreciate it. So we're going to jump into our traditional groundwater monitoring and sampling update. Mr. Joel Jansen will lead us off on that. And this was we did try to throw in some pictures this time around. Our new environmental support manager Dwight Holland's like, hey, throw some pictures in there, make this a little more interesting, and let people know exactly what we're doing and give them a picture in their mind. So we did do that and try to make this a little more entertaining than just words on slides. So Joel, I'll turn it over to you.
It looks like Laura may have a question. Laura? See your hand up.
Okay, can I start?
I think so. Laura, do you want to type your question in the chat? I'm not sure why I can't hear you. She'd like to review the agenda. Can you review the agenda?
Yeah, so this is the agenda for this evening. We'll do our traditional groundwater sampling update, what's occurred over the last couple of months. And I think we had some new results come in that were pending at the October RAB, and then had some November sampling as well. We'll talk about, we've been talking about the last couple of meetings, new installation of groundwater monitoring wells, and so we've got WDNR approval on that plan, and so we're going to go into detail on exactly where we want to install those wells and tell you where we're at in that process. There's some nuances there. And then we'll go into our project management update. So talk about future contracts, where we are with the groundwater proposed plan, some additional topics, 5-year review that's ongoing, a community involvement plan, and some other ancillary topics. So we'll talk about PFAS, some other things like that. But as you all could see, those are all in the slides that we sent out last week. So.
And I asked this because I wanted about 5 minutes on the agenda to present a draft resolution.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, we can certainly do that during our questions and public comment period. Absolutely.
Thank you.
We're just starting off with some slides of groundwater sampling. So as most of you know, our company has been at Badger for many years, and we're the contractor for doing all the well sampling, reporting all the results, dealing with like well installations, abandonment of wells, sampling of all the homeowners. Here's just a couple pictures doing some sampling at a couple different types of wells. The one on the left is a different method that we only use at a few types of wells where it's just a geo pump. Most of the wells that we have, like on the right, are dedicated pumps in all the wells, and we use an air compressor. So these are the types of, most of the ones you're going to see around Badger are the orange painted ones. Maybe on Highway 78, people that live over there, you'll see the yellow painted ones on the side of the highway. So just different years, what choose what they get painted like.
Are you providing electricity to those, or do you have a power source too?
Oh, that method on the left?
Yeah.
No, that's all a battery.
Right. You said those are pumps.
With air compressor. So you bring an air compressor to the site. Yeah. No, there's no electricity or anything in any well. So here's an update of what we've been doing over the last probably 5-6 months. So in September, we had the monitoring wells for deterrent burning ground. Where is there? My dot. So deterrent burning ground up here in the upper right. That's a semi-annual sampling event. And then the propellant burning ground down in the lower left that goes down to the river. That is also a semi-annual sampling event. And then the nitrocellulose plume just up in here, that's semi-annual. That's just a very small plume, and you got 7 wells there. And then November, we do some of the quarterly wells in the deterrent burning ground up here. And then just a few in the central, and that's down here in the Water's Edge subdivision. So what we're going to be doing is, of course, in April we do all of the same wells again, because you're doing a 2-time per year sampling event to evaluate what's going on in the deterrent burning ground plume and the propellant burning ground plume, spring and fall. And then June we do all the wells in the central plume. So that's throughout here. And that goes all down to the Water's Edge subdivision area in Gruber's Grove Bay. And then August is where we have our annual sampling for all our residential wells. So in here, there's still 2 wells that are being sampled quarterly. We have a well up by the deterrent burning ground, and then a well down here in the central plume near Gruber's Grove Bay. They're sampled quarterly just due to their relationship to the plumes. So I can get to some of the plumes if you had a question, Roger?
Yeah, on the residential wells, those have been predetermined and you test the same wells every year, is that right?
Roger had asked, do we predetermine and test the same wells every year? We have been working with Luke at the DNR on a particular sampling plan, but we have been adding to it based on if there are new wells installed in certain areas. So we are continually testing the wells in the waters or Wiggins Bay area up here by the end of the turn burning ground. So that would be pretty much anybody that could be potentially impacted if the plume was to be further down. Then the central plume is getting the Water's Edge subdivision tested. So every time they add a new well, we add that well to the sampling program in that subdivision for the central plume. And then we're testing wells in the Keller Road area of the propellant burning ground plume, and then a select number of wells in the windings, and then down 78. So the 2018-2019 is where we did everybody once. And that helped determine what the future wells were going to be. If any of those wells would be impacted during that, then we were going to use that to change the program.
Are any of the wells in that newer development by Ruthie Badger Road, are they sampled?
Roger. Any of the new wells up here, there's a new subdivision going in by Ruthie Badger Lane, south of Wiggins Bay. Are any of those wells going to be tested? And I would say at the moment I would not recommend that. We did do all of the wells to the north of that, and we haven't found any issues with any volatiles or Dynage tiling. So at this point I wouldn't suggest they get tested. The turn burning ground plume hasn't moved that far towards the south yet. So we are testing many homes to the north of this area right in here. We're testing all those homes annually there, and that would be the entrance to the other subdivision. Anything else, Roger? Okay. Sorry, I can't see your head. So we're just do a little update on the deterrent burning ground. So on site, which would be anything to the left or west of the boundary line, which is here in red, and those have been decreasing over the past 5 years, the Dynage tiling. And so when I'm thinking of Dynage tiling, just remember I'm thinking of all 6 isomers combined, and that makes the enforcement standard of 0.05 parts per billion. So that's what we're looking to clean up for any of that number. So not just one particular compound, but all 6 of the isomers added together. And then off-site, which is the wells that are, so in 2 yellow ones here, these are off-site. And so any of the wells off-site here, this is the nest that I would consider as the one that we have been watching for a long time. Those have been increasing over the past 5 years. So overall, there is a trend that we still have increasing concentrations for D&T in this well nest with the B and the C well nest. And so I do have a presentation that will follow some slides, and we'll show you cross-section getting to that particular location when we talk about the new wells that we're looking to install related to the problem that we're discussing. So on this particular map, actually, Roger, these are all the dots that show where all the residential wells are being tested annually, right here. So this is where that subdivision down here is going to be developed, and so we're already testing all of these homes and here in case there might be an issue that the plume moving that direction. So the plume, or on the east side here, we have this red box, 1503 A and C. In past meetings, we've talked about D&T starting to get shown up in this well nest, and that well has always been clean. We had tested it in November, and we've added that well to be quarterly now because we're trying to watch it a little bit closer, and we did not detect D&T. So that's really positive. But we're not slowing down the testing. We're going to continue testing it quarterly because we really want to make sure we're monitoring the situation. If there's something happening where the plume would be moving, is there something moving further out in this direction? But that's why we keep this monitoring well and it's been there for 7 years. And so we had 6 years of no D&T detections, and obviously we want to keep that nothing in it, but still keep testing it. And then we do have the additional wells that we're going to show you in a down gradient location down in this area where I got my pointer. So for the propellant burning ground, this box over on the right is just the zoomed in box of the red up here. So this is this area over here to the right. This is the waste pits. This is where the 49 pit was, where this has all the capped area, where the worst contamination in the propellant burning ground was, where the main pits from the burning in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So overall, we've had water levels that were really high, and now they've dropped another 6 feet because we just haven't had a lot. You guys probably know we haven't got as much rain, and so the last 2 years we've had 6 feet of water table drop, and that's pretty significant. But it's getting down to more of a normal level where the levels are really high, unprecedented as far as 40 years combined. So now with the drop, which is really positive for what we're dealing with, we still have a well, this 001, and I have a circle here. This is under the cap. But in the last year, we have seen an increase in the D&T concentration. And so that's all 6 isomers have been detected within that well. And so approximately 6 a year ago for total D&T, and that is now up to 280. So that's September, and that's the highest concentration now for the propellant burning ground. People that have been to meetings before, they know that the highest well had been right up here, which is just south of there, PBN 8202A. And we've shown some graphs showing that had been, I believe, over 1,000 after we had the high rains. Then we had that particular well on the south side with those elevated levels. So that well has decreased quite a bit with the drop in the water table. And then showing just the standard there is 0.05 for the ES, for total. So all the wells you see here on this map, these are being semi-annual tested up in the plume area. There's a few wells down here that are tested at a lesser frequency on the edge of the plume. As far as like the volatiles, those are still decreasing, especially in the source area. There's very few volatiles remaining of any concern. But we still test every well in the propellant burning ground for volatiles. We are still seeing volatiles that exceed the state standards within the plume, like carbon tat, TCE, ethyl ether, chloroform. And those still persist off-site, the chlorinated solvents, as you know, they haven't disappeared yet. So something we're still monitoring. And then the off-site wells, I do have a specific map showing the propellant burning ground to show some of the data gaps that I think even people have mentioned before, like, hey, what about the well over there or over here? And so that's where we're going to get to on the next. So if you have specific questions, you want to kind of marry it with the well installation, we're still going to have some of the figures up for those 2 plumes if you want to wait till then. But now Matt had a brief. Is that okay? Wait until the next part of it? Okay.
All right, I've just got one quick slide here, and then Joel will jump back up here, and then I'll take the rest. But just wanted to talk about the effort to install new groundwater monitoring wells. So if you all recall that last August, USGS briefed you all on the report that they had compiled, and really it just focused on areas of uncertainty within the groundwater plumes. And so we met as a team and pulled together a plan and proposed 8 new monitoring well locations So as you see there, we submitted that plan to WDNR, and they were fantastic in turning that around to us in less than a month. So we got approval from them in October, and so what Joel is going to go into next in detail is the location of those wells and kind of where they'll help us with eliminating uncertainty in the plume. I did want to also add, just for transparency's sake, that in WDNR's letter to us approving of the plan for the new 8 monitoring wells, they also expressed a desire to see us add additional wells in the central plume. You'll see a downgradient extent and the northwest extent. So WDNR feels there's also some lack of clarity there as to what's happening at the plume. So that will be a follow-on effort after we get these 8 wells installed, and we'll move forward with addressing the uncertainty in the central plume. Where we are, Joel he'll speak a little bit more directly to exact locations that we've pinpointed, but just please keep in mind that the locations are proposed locations at this point. Obviously, landowners are involved, and these are all off-site. So we've reached out and started working with those landowners for access agreements, leases to put new wells on their property. So that's all ongoing. And the way the Army works, the Army Corps of Engineers Omaha District handles all real estate functions for us. So involved there in setting up agreements and getting funds in place to allow these wells to be installed. So hopefully in the very near future we'll have those wells installed, but we do have to get clearance from property owners. So I'll turn it back over to Joel unless anybody has questions for me, and he'll go into details on those locations.
I just have a question. I don't know who would answer it, but I've been thinking the central plume, and I see that WDNR has suggested more wells because of the down gradient extent. And my question is, the settling ponds, the groundwater under the settling ponds, where does that go? Does it feed into the central plume, which I wonder, because we haven't really well defined the source of the central plume. We have, but we haven't. Or does it go into Gruber's Grove Bay? So that I'm glad we're getting those additional wells, because I don't know if does anybody have that answer.
Joel's been around a while. To me, in my mind, it's kind of a little bit in no man's land. It's a little bit closer to the propellant burning ground. But Joel can probably speak to the exact trends. Yeah.
Okay, so Michelle had a question. I'll summarize. She's trying to understand with the installation of these new wells for determining the central plume is where does the groundwater go from the settling ponds? Is that related to a potential source for the central plume, or is it a different area? So on this particular figure, we do call out where the settling ponds are. So over here is Final Creek. This is Pond 1, which is totally beneath the propellant burning ground plume. And then settling Pond 2 and 3 are out in the middle. Settling Pond 4, and then this is Gruber's Grove Bay. So it does not impact at all the central plume. There were monitoring wells very specific related to the settling ponds that were abandoned in 2016, I believe. We did test those. They were installed. Some of those were there for over 10 years, and we weren't really finding anything. We were looking for D&T and VOCs, and there really wasn't anything. And so a lot of the wells that I was talking about may have been abandoned. They were over in this area. And so at that time when we did the feasibility study for the Alt-FS, that was part of that is the groundwater contribution. We weren't finding anything in that particular area, but the area over here is still then included with the propellant burning ground as a sampling idea that you need to keep monitoring wells there in that area to continue monitoring if there is a contribution from the settling ponds that are unaware of in this settling pond 1 area. But that was part of the feasibility study from 2013, I think, for the settling ponds.
So the groundwater under the settling ponds, where would it discharge to? Would it discharge to Gruber's Grove Bay?
Okay, so Michelle's other question.
Does the groundwater go from the settling ponds? Does that discharge to Gruber's Grove Bay? So the groundwater table by Gruber's Grove Bay and the settling pond 4 is, maybe 5 feet deep at the most, usually. The groundwater table over by the settling ponds maybe only 40 feet deep. So your answer would be is if it's infiltrating through the sand at the bottom of settling pond 3, it's going to infiltrate directly to the water table straight down. And then it would migrate with the flow of wherever direction that's going to be.
And what was that direction?
Based on the past monitoring that we've done, it would have been in a southerly direction from those wells, and all that information is available. All the data, all the elevation data is submitted to the DNR, so it isn't like gone, but we do have all that information still.
I'm just thinking that might be another contamination source we need to think about a little bit, maybe.
I guess
something to be discussed if there was an additional settling pond remedial investigation.
Yeah.
How long does it take one of these wells to clean up? If you get a hit on a particular chemical in the well, and how long does it take it to clean itself out?
All right, Charlie's
was how long does it take for one of these wells to clean up from a chemical that had it in it? So my answer would be is there a source area of gradient that would be able to consistently provide that contaminant towards the well, or is it something on the edge, like we had this well that we were talking about, the deterrent burning ground. It's really close to the edge. Is there just occasionally some water, because it's very porous matrix, and sometimes there's a pathway that you might find a little bit of that D&T, but then it isn't consistent. And so you're just reaching the edge of the plume, so it's very diffuse out there, kind of shadowy.
So it's a matter of days or weeks?
We don't.
Are sampling it every, 3 to 4 months. So I would say once you get closer into the plume, it's going to be consistent. If it isn't consistent, then something's wrong. So once you get down into the middle of the propellant burning ground plume, I look at a volatile organic and you sample it every 6 months, I can tell you what the number is going to be before you get the sample result, or we've done something wrong. You say, oh, it's going to be 4.1. Now it's 4.5. And so you could follow the trend just right along that you should have the same amount of information in the middle of the plume. So it shouldn't change that dramatically inside of the plume within 6 months. So there are really good graphs that show that you can just continue to trend exactly in the plume itself. The edges are a little more complicated to determine that. Okay, so back to the deterrent burning ground. And then this is a little, we have a better, this is a little bit, ooh, did I miss something? Oh, I don't think I bumped it. So we have this A here for the end of the deterrent burning ground plume. The well depths down in that area are going to be 93 and 158, so we're going to have two different elevations. We will show you a cross-section through the middle so you can see where those line up. So this is kind of the overview. The propellant burning ground has two different locations. And so these are nested locations here. We have three different depths at this A level, 119, 165, and 213. So that 213 is going to be right at the bedrock surface. Same with the B location down here by the river. And then we're going to have 51, 98, and 147. And 147 is the bedrock surface. So we're working on getting the landowner permissions. Currently, as we're speaking, emailing, talking about plans. We're really trying to get this done so we can get it done. I want to get them done before summer, but we have to make sure everybody's okay with it. So the delineation that we're talking about is say the A up here is when you look at the map and you would say, hey, where are you sampling? Well, you're kind of missing out on that edge, and that's why we've been talking with the DNR, and we've known that we needed to probably get this done, and so that's why the Army put that in the contract, is to put these additional wells in. So this would look at down gradient extent of the A and B wells that we've been talking about that have the D&T back here in the plume. And then between Highway Z down here and the plant up here, there's been no monitoring wells since the 90s, and so now we're trying to get an evaluation of what's going on down in the middle of the plume here for D&T, if there is D&T down here, but more so the volatiles, chlorinated solvents, TCE, ethyl ether, chloroform. And then down here by the river, we did an investigation in 2013 that determined that there is chlorinated solvents entering the river and what the concentrations were. We defined the vertical and horizontal extent. I do have a figure that will show that, and so we're reusing that information to determine what's the depth of the contamination going to be, where the well is going to be, and we aren't just going in blind, so we at least have some preliminary data. And that's down by just south of the dam.
That's south of the dam.
Yeah. So.
Looks like Laura has a question. Laura, go ahead.
Oh, this is Randy. I see Laura has her hand up.
Laura, you're muted. I'm not sure. Her hand's up, but she's still muted.
If you could go back to the previous slide. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
Yes, the small letter A, in that area there, will you be testing those wells for PFAS too? Because I know just up gradient there at the settling ponds, the highest concentration of PFAS was found there, I believe.
Matt says not at this time.
Why?
Yeah, so Laura, we'll address this a little bit later in the slides, but so we're contracting for a PFAS remedial investigation here this fiscal year. We've briefed you all recently on some changes in promulgated levels for PFAS, and so this is a different effort. We will start with nature and extent of PFAS at the propellant burning ground, specific to the one location identified in the site inspection. So that's where we'll start. If our investigation leads there, yeah, sure, we'll get to that. But at this point, we'll work on the immediate area and then step out from there to determine nature and extent.
So the deterrent burn ground, just showing a little bit more zoomed in view. This is the area, as you can see, the plume showing in blue. There are two wells here. I said the B and the C, and those are the ELN listed up here, 103B and C, which we've had the D&T for numerous years, and that we're seeing some increasing trends the last 5 years. So we already have this well down here, which is a B level well, which the water table is only 3 feet deep at the most because it's so close to the water. But the well is deeper, but we haven't seen it there. But so the curiosity is this plume move further to the east towards the other part of Wiggins Bay? So this well nest tap will help figure out, has it been migrating there without our knowledge? So get a handle on where the horizontal extent is, and then the vertical extent of, is the well nest over back here, the B and the C, has that contamination moving east at all, or has this plume expanded at all out in this direction? This is a well that had already been replaced by the Army in here. That was a sand well previously, which had some varying levels of DNT above the enforcement standard. So we already know that there has been some DNT down in this area, but we're not sure if it was just discharging into this bay, the back bay of part of Wiggins Bay. This is connected back to Wiggins through a culvert under Highway 78. And then the nice cross section to show right through the heart of the plume. This is actually from the RIFS, so we reuse this idea. So, this is for dinositylene, so total concentrations. The blue area here shows what the enforcement standard exceedance was. The green is the PAL. Not to say that there's a lot of wells that are close to the PAL, but we use that as the outside boundary of the plume if there is a PAL, and that is 0.005 parts per billion is the PAL for DNT. So down gradient, so we're off-site, we're at that same well nest, B and C that we talked about. So this is why it's in the plume. You can see right here, these two wells, and then there's a bedrock well there that has always been clean, and that was installed in 2010. So now down gradient, we had a residential well here that was showing some contamination, and then down gradient we're looking at putting in these two wells, the B and the C. So this is the right here where my dot is. Let's see if this is the B well, and so we were trying to evaluate straight across horizontally to make the next B well. So if we had exact down gradient, that this well would be able to capture potentially that area. And then down here with the C, where we still have DNT above, the same thing. We're trying to pick the exact vertical, not necessarily looking at ground elevation, but just what it would be underneath the earth. Where is that plume going to be going if it went in that direction? Here we do not have a deeper well at this point. At the moment, we are just trying to evaluate if the B and C are clean or are they contaminated, and then there would be a next step if there was something, say there was DNT found, then obviously we have to evaluate that further if the plume was to have migrated down in this direction.
How far east is the river? Any water body?
So we're talking about from here, you go straight south to the pond on the west side of 78, or you got to go to Wiggins Bay. So you're still Wiggins Bay, you're talking about 700 feet at least to get to Wiggins Bay if you're kind of heading southeast. And otherwise, you're only talking about 300 feet to get to the pond, which is actually a private pond, I believe.
Groundwater can go through the culvert going under 78.
Well, the surface.
Yeah. So there is a spring in that pond. The landowner has noted that there's a spring located further down here that's been flowing forever, and so that is an indication where groundwater will be coming up into the pond. That is just a hydrology thing. Springs will come out and push up to the surface and create a pond, and so that can come straight out of the aquifer, sand and gravel. We have never done an evaluation of other springs in Wiggins Bay, but this will be the first step on knowing if there is something moving further down. Any questions about the deterrent burning ground before I move on to the next propellant burning ground area? Yeah.
I have a question about the previous slide, the well that's tested quarterly, the residential well. It's, I think, a green screen. There you go. What have we seen the last couple rounds? Wasn't there some detections of TNT there?
We are testing that quarterly. I believe it's been quite a while since I've had a detection. I don't recall if we've had any in 2022, but I'm not positive. I thought it was maybe 2021, but don't quote me on that.
Well, I'm thinking we should have monitoring wells there. We can't use private wells in lieu of monitoring wells. And I understand about close to the bay, but I think the eastern margin of that plume is not well defined. In fact, that it showed up in that well. I know it's at low level sporadically, but it's there. So that would be a question and recommendation that I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other deterrent burning ground questions? Okay, propellant burning ground. So we have two different nests, and the nests are spaced vertically so that you know, and that's the way all of our monitoring wells are. When you see something that's like A, B, C, D, E, F, you just keep going from the water table surface of A down, 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 and then once you get to E, you're in the bedrock, and we have an F well actually up here, and that's really deep in bedrock. So currently, any of the wells that we're looking at installing are in the sand and gravel. So they're either, I think we're looking at either B, C, or D. So a little bit further deep. These plumes are a little deeper. So we're skipping the surface A. And that's pretty typical if you're like off-site in the propellant burning ground. You'll see that all the wells here are either B, C, D, and then we did have an E well here, which would be in bedrock. So off-site, we're talking about halfway between, which is a mile. So the boundary here, it's a section line down to Highway Z. There is a nest near the bike trail here, but there is an opening that the plume is pretty wide and then pretty long in that area, but now we're trying to get an opportunity to get some information here a little bit further south. We can use the railroad property where the bike trail is, and at least they're initially interested and still talking to us about it because the DOT just there that way with their state property. But obviously that's the most pleasable. So if that works, that would be the way we'd like to go. And then obviously we would be accessing this well by the trail. So we would be working with Sauk County, who manages the trail, and then accessing that down the trail every time you go to do the well. So that's something that has to get worked out. But that would be instead of using farmland and using then private landowners and then using their access and trying to build a road or do something else. And then, this is a big area. I'm sure they don't really want their crops really aggravated. So that would be at least a long-term solution. So the wells wouldn't have to be disturbed for a long time because obviously these wells down here, they were installed in 91. And, we're still able to keep those and no one's complaining too much that we've got these monitoring wells out there on Highway Z. The other one's down here by the river. So we're also looking at doing a B, C, and D there. This is the 2013 investigation that I talked about that we had done, these push geoprobes. We gave a presentation for the people that have been around that long, showing all the different information that we gathered. We did all chlorinated solvents. DNT was not available to be tested based on the method we used, but it did show where the chlorinated solvents were and really defined the reason why people would ask, why is the plume drawn that way? The only reason is because of the 2013 investigation. So we have not done anything down there since, no additional drilling. So at least we would have a well nest down the center So we would know what's coming right down the middle of the worst case scenario towards the river. So at least we could document. I know that people that read the 2012 Groundwater Alt-FS were questioning lots of things, including the DNR at that time. So we'd finally at least address that issue for this wellness down here. So obviously, Alliant owns every piece of property along the river, so we have to work with Alliant, and they have a power line. There's a bike trail down there that some people walk their dog a lot down there. So lots of things to navigate down there with them. But they were really agreeable when we did the initial investigation about using their property to look for the groundwater contamination initially.
Where is that in relationship to the VFW
park? There's a mountain bike parking lot now at the far end of the campground. So you know where the park? It's to the north. Yeah, so there's a little, I don't know, they got some posts at the end of the campground, and then there's a little parking lot, and then they have a little kiosk there. I think they might have a map or a station or something. Then it starts to get the high grass past the parking lot further north, and then it gets to scrub, and then the power line still runs through there. Then there's some paths, and there's mountain biking trails somewhat in there, and we stay on the low side, and you keep walking about probably 4 or 5 power poles, and so you go deep into the scrub and start coming up the hill a little bit, and it's off in a clearing area. But it has to be enough away so you're not tipping this huge drill rig up to the high voltage line too. So that's a concern. Got to stay far away from that new line, and they just upgraded that a while ago, so now it's got more voltage. I think there's 2 lines possibly down there, but so that would be something that we would also look at doing semi-annually, same period as all the other wells we're talking about. So we'd have to have access to it. Like we do ours in April and September. Is this when this plume gets done? So as far as like a cross section goes, this cross section was from the 2021 Groundwater Alt-FS, and so we just superimposed on that. So this is how I drew the lines for this particular figure, was that previous investigation. Otherwise, I didn't have a magic idea. It was from that. And so we were trying to, the D would be right above the bedrock, and we tapped the bedrock when we did that investigation. It should be about 147 approximately, but we'll obviously drill to the bedrock and then install the well right at the surface. When we did our investigation before, there was no contamination found right above the bedrock. At this time, we are not looking to go into the rock unless there is a reason in the future to do so. We don't believe there's any contamination at this point. Unless the D well becomes an issue, then you could evaluate if you need to go to the bedrock. The B and the C here, we're trying to simulate where is some of the majority of the contamination spaced out. And as you can see, 51 feet, water table is less than 5, so you're going to be 40-some feet below the water table, because the water table can come up pretty high there in the spring. And then you're talking another 40-some feet to the next depth, and we do know that carbon tetrachloride is in here, and then down another 50 feet or so to the final depth. So getting a nice spacing. These spacings are very similar to what we're seeing with the wells that are on Highway Z or Highway 78 for the vertical spacing, just so you can evaluate. I expect to find the B and the C will have carbon tetrachloride above the standard. TCE, trichloethylene, will be there, but it may not be above the drinking water standard. It's hard to say. But we had the B and the C level during that investigation had approximately 16 parts per billion of carbon tet. So that's kind of a basis of what we're looking at from 9 years ago. Obviously, in 9 years, there would be This is all a carbon tet map, so you'd be looking at whatever was back further that could have migrated then in 9 years. It's going to migrate throughout the year, so you get whatever the contamination could have been up at the top of the hill by 78, migrating down towards the river for carbon tetrachloride or TCE.
Is it possible to go
Under the river into land east of the river?
I know it's been discussed to sample bedrock homes on the other side or wells. I know the USGS has weighed in before about the water on the other side of the river also flows into the river, so they meet at some point in the middle of the river or somewhere. So their water comes to the river and our water comes to the river, and so our water doesn't really go on the other side of the river. It's just the way of hydrology goes. It can't also go in the sand and gravel to the other side of the river. They kind of meet together. So at the moment, we're not evaluating anything on the other side.
Laura has a question.
Go ahead, Laura.
Question for the DNR, and if you could go back one slide that would be helpful. There's along County C where we're testing in the plume, and yes, but we're not testing the homes there. And I would like to know why the DNR has not required the Army to test those drinking water wells when we know they're smack dab in the middle of the plume, and we have exceedances, and we're installing wells to find the degree and extent of the contamination, and why is that not happening?
This well is a shallow bedrock well that had been tested quarterly and annually for many years, but it was probably I don't know if it's the last 5 to 10 years. It was sampled in 2019 or 2018. There is a couple wells. The co-op has a well. There's 1 or 2 homes right in here. I think those are mostly bedrock wells from what I recall. And they were sampled on and off, but most recently in the 2018 to 2019 range. Okay. So just for background.
Sure. Right. And we know that water quality has changed within that plume. You mentioned that there's not currently monitoring wells of gradient to show that the wells, the private drinking water wells on County Z are not at risk. I don't understand that. Is anybody from DNR on this call?
Yep, yeah. You got both in the room.
I'm not sure if she can hear you. If you can speak to
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, and certainly I know I wasn't around whenever the monitoring plan was put into place to see which private wells would and wouldn't be sampled, but if that's something that we need to look into, we can certainly get in touch with Joe in the Army and have those discussions and see what the history says, essentially, and then also see what the data says, too.
Great. I think the most important thing is we need some current data. Everything we have is so old and things have obviously changed and moved and gotten worse in certain areas. So that would be awesome if you could look at that for us. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And other people and Isaac is that the wells that are being sampled annually private-wise, there's one here and then one over here. And that was something that 2 predecessors ago from the DNR had worked out to at least get something sampled in that area, and it was based on depth. So I think he was trying to evaluate instead of doing everybody. So that's just the history of some of that area.
Thank you. And based on my memory, one of the owners on County Z, and I don't want to say the name, but you know who it is, had their well replaced and dug in deeper. It's a farm. And he was told by the Army, this is back in the Fordham days, that his well would be tested annually forever, in perpetuity. So
there was on the south side of Z that was replaced. That well was replaced and put right there. That's the new well that the Army drilled outside here. We had some monitoring wells there, and we hadn't been testing them anymore because they were clean. So I don't know if Michelle. Oh, sorry, did I not repeat Michelle's question? So Michelle had asked about a well down by Z in a private well that wasn't get tested, and they had their well replaced. So I've probably seen the document maybe, but.
Yeah, and I know that person was upset about that. So I know we put it on your radar from time to time, but DNR, you guys have changed. So just so you're aware of that. Yeah.
So this is a homeowner here that Laura was discussing also.
Roger, yeah.
Was Joel in the right spot when he had his little...
I'm bad at geography, so I don't know.
Because if indeed that was right there by the cemetery where Z curves up to 12...
There is a home over here.
Yeah, there's two of them in the middle. There's a farm on the north side.
There's a
farm.
Yeah.
There's a farm right here, and there's a couple houses in this area.
But the one that Michelle was talking about that had to have its well replaced, do we know where that was?
Okay, so Roger's question.
Do we know where that home that had their well replaced? And that would be right where this dot is.
Where you were pointing before, that was way outside the pool.
The well that was...
The Army put the well in here, and this dot, and that is where the existing water is that this person is drinking.
That's the new well.
Yeah. So
they pipe it east to his house.
Correct.
They got through the whole field.
Put it out there. Yeah.
Well, that's
So that particular
has water that it's deep. I believe it's probably bedrock also. But yeah, it was put out here. And it had been tested for many years in the past, yes. What I didn't show was this is the nest that we were showing through the middle of the farm fields. This is the vertical right in here through. This is the carbon tet plume right down there. So we're trying to kind of bracket where this enforcement standard is for like carbon tetrachloride right through the middle. And obviously evaluate if there's anything, how much is near the surface of the bedrock at this time. So that's where we're trying to bracket the plume. We are not aware, and this is why you're installing a well, is has DNT traveled down gradient this far? You know, is this something that needs to be concerning? Because we haven't done any previous investigation. So there has been no previous little investigation down in this area off-site right here. So this is the first. So we won't.
Moving south or east?
The plume.
Yeah.
So it's following this arrow right here, and then it's going right down through here,
Southeast.
and then southeast.
Yeah.
And since I'd probably say the last 10 to 15 years, we've been noticing the track from the plume used to be out to the west of the chlorinated solvents, and it's been slowly shifting to the east. And that is not because of pumping that we're aware of, but we have seen continual shifting of the plume, and so we've updated that. That's why we have these monitoring wells here on the plant site, and then we have some additional monitoring wells that may be added to the program up on site to monitor any potential further migration of the plume towards the east. So,
is that because of the consistency of the rock and sand that they find an easier path?
I'd say with this big volume of movement, I'd say no. The path is not necessarily the rock matrix or the sand matrix. I think it's a regional thing with this much variability. That I was looking at stuff from the 90s, and it was much higher contamination to the west, but it hasn't really migrated south. Like we have this monitoring well nest down here out in the farm field across from the culvers, and this well has always been fine. I mean, no plume has ever reached further south. So, and that well is going to stay, that well nest will stay to monitor any down gradient south.
It likes to flow towards the east rather than to the west.
Yes, so the water down here below the dam does want to get to the east as fast as possible. So this path we show is very, dependent on where that dam is and how much water is coming back around. Because everything above the dam is going to also be pushing through the windings subdivision here, and it's going to also try to push on the west side of the dam itself. So all that water has to continue to get below the dam. It can't go above the dam. So there's still water that's going to keep pushing through this area. Yes?
I'm sure you've done this, but have you tested the new well at the dam? That's been sampled.
So Charlie's question, have we tested the new well at the dam?
And that's within the last 25 years they put it.
So I did test a well inside in 2018. That there was a gentleman that helped me figure out where the right spigot was. But I believe that would have been the newest. They did have an older one.
Yes.
I remember
that was an artesian well. The old one.
Okay, so I assume that would have been a very deep bedrock well.
The one is now, yes.
Okay. And we did not find anything in that well when we tested it. And so we're not continuing. We didn't recommend testing their well anymore.
Joel, you mentioned earlier some fluctuations in the water table. Would that have anything to do with the movement of that plume further east?
Question was, is fluctuation of the water table and movement of the plume? I would say that this is more of a decades-long movement of the plume, and the water table elevation is still much higher at this time, but it had been pretty consistent, like say 10 years ago, that it hadn't been fluctuating up as much as it had been recently. What I hadn't shown yet is just, this is I think my last, this is just a little cross section. So we're looking, if you were sitting in the river below the river and you were looking into the beach area, where would you be seeing the contamination? So you're kind of looking back to the west and you're all underwater, and this down here is the bedrock. And so we were able to find the bedrock in all of these locations in 2013, and all these ones on the outside didn't have any solvent contamination to be found. And so these chlorinated solvents, this is directed by carbon tetrachloride. So these two, green for the PAL, the ES with the blue, and the ES is 5 and the PAL is 0.5. So the 16 that I was talking about was found in this area, right here. So we're trying to find out the B right here. So we're trying to get an evaluation mid-level, then deeper further down here at the C at about close to 100. And then at the very bottom, we must have detected a little bit of carbon tet because I have the green drawn right to the bottom. But it was a pretty low number. But we want to make sure we know what is right at that bedrock surface. We're still going to be doing all the D&T isomers, just like every other well, so at least know and inform people what the D&T concentration is, if there is something down there. And then obviously the volatiles with the chlorinated solvents. So this is not a horizontal pushing wells across. This is just straight down the middle, just so we know what are the concentrations that are going into the river. And that would continue with the remaining part of the monitoring program. So these wells also would go into the monitoring program that exists today.
Do concentrations generally stay up rather than way down?
Do concentrates stay up rather than down was the question. I would say this plume has a lot of variabilities that we've noticed with carbon tetrachloride and trichloroethylene TCE, whereas we've had higher, like 60, 70, 80, 90 parts per billion in different wells further up plume, off-site, but then they fade away. And so there is some migration vertically as horizontally down towards the river. So I don't know that the 16 for carbon tet would be consistent. There's definitely going to be a variability there from maybe there's some further contamination of gradient, or now you're also evaluating any mixing potential with the river itself, because now we're getting to that area where the river has some impact with that basin.
Chemicals, as far as weight, do they tend to have some gravity?
These chemicals tend to have a weight and they sink. They're not tending to float near the water table. So we've noticed that that's where all our wells been more on a deeper end as the plume goes off-site. So this is the end of any groundwater questions, and then it's all Matt. Pictures are over. Sorry, Matt. Any other groundwater questions at this time?
Right. Thanks, Joel. Much appreciated. So just to delve into some other topics, as we've talked about over the last few months. First one being Gruber's Grove Bay. So as we reported in October, we awarded a contract to AECOM, which we have representation from AECOM and the Corps of Engineers here with us tonight, to pull together basically all the historical data for Gruber's Grove Bay. Obviously, you all know and have been involved a lot longer than I have, but we've dredged the bay twice, and that has not panned out for us, and there's still mercury contamination in the bay. So AECOM is currently working on pulling together all the data for the last 25 plus years of investigation and remedial actions on Gruber's Grove Bay, and kind of creating a model of that, and so we can look at where the contamination is, what the current levels are, evaluate risk, and then the next step would be to look at alternatives to put the best action forward as to final remedial action for Gruber's Grove Bay. So we'd originally reported in October that we had hoped to have the draft desktop remedial investigation by the end of the calendar year. It's taken a little bit longer to pull together all those pieces of information, so we're looking at more of a springtime arrival of that draft desktop supplemental remedial investigation. So we'll look at that from an Army perspective and work with the Corps of Engineers and AECOM on that, and then get that over to WDNR. And we did have a kickoff call with WDNR in December to talk through their concerns, and they've expressed some, they've asked some questions, and we're clarifying those in the document as well, and moving forward. You can see the objectives of the overall effort there. So really just to make sure we have a good handle on nature and extent of contamination, make sure we understand the full picture of risk, and then make the best decision going forward as to what the remedial action is to be. And you all will be a part of that process, much like the groundwater remedial investigation. We'll put forward a proposed plan to you all for review and comment, and then we'll seek public feedback on that, and then we'll move forward with a final decision. Yes, sir.
You're basing your evidence on prior testing. You're not doing any testing to evaluate this.
So right now, the main effort, I'm sorry, to repeat the question. So the question was, are we doing any new testing as part of this effort? So we do have options in that contract where we identify data gaps and need for new information, but at this point, the concentrated effort is pulling the complete picture together. So if we do identify any needs for additional information, we do have a mechanism to go out and gather that. Yes, sir.
Do the homeowners at Water's Edge have any input to the DNR or to the Army as to what's going to happen?
So the question was, do the homeowners at Water's Edge have any input as to what happens with Groovers Grove Bay? And absolutely. So that's part of the circular process is public participation. So once we pull together the remedial investigation, we'll put that out. We'll have a brief here at the RAB. We'll talk about what the true risk is. My understanding at this point, historically, is we have mercury risk, and it's purely an ecological risk, not a human health risk. And that's just from historical reading I've done. But we'll pull together alternatives and seek public input on those alternatives. So, and I've heard differing views as to whether people want an invasive action there or not. But certainly that will be put forth and considered as part of this effort going forward.
Looking to the forward, you don't see anything happening on the bay this year. This is going to take a while.
So the question is, do we see anything happening as far as on the bay this year? The only thing that could potentially happen this year is additional data gathering. So if we need to go out and take additional samples, but no remedial action. That's correct. So any questions on Groovers Grove Bay before we move forward? I hit the right buttons here. All right. Just a quick update on USGS support. I think you all have seen some of the products they've pulled together. And thank you. Sorry. Just get it off screen. Yeah. Thanks. Some of the efforts they've done, and you all expressed the desire to have them continue to support the project. So we have retained their services going forward, and we've entered into an agreement for the next 2 years with USGS. They do pretty much have the base contaminant transport model ready to go. So at the next RAB, you'll be briefed on that and an update there. So much like you've seen before, but just kind of further refined and moving towards that final product. And then we're looking toward the July RAB to actually talk about transport modeling of contaminants. So we'll have the base model in April that just essentially tells us how groundwater flows, how it interacts. A lot of the questions that Joel was entertaining here is that model gives us an actual depiction of which way groundwater flows. Michelle, to your question, at the settling ponds. So that's great information to have. And then the transport model itself is you put a contaminant into that model and you see how it progresses through the system. So it helps us to make better decisions, put monitoring wells where they'll be most effective, things like that. And then we've talked about leveraging their services as well for a pilot study as we move forward into the remedial action for groundwater at large on Badger. So any questions on USGS support and what they're working on?
Can they tell us whether this is a 10 or a 20-year before this goes away?
It will help with that. I mean, obviously, the data you put in is really contingent upon what you get out of it, right? But I think with all the information we have historically and all the effort that's been put into this, it will certainly help us to better understand how long it will take to clean up. And then as we move into our potential remedial action, which is injections to help speed up reducing the amount of contamination, we can model that then and understand how quickly and how heavily the impact will be on the contamination within the plumes. Right. So we talked about this a little bit. So the proposed plan is nearing completion. We did get legal concurrence on that at the end of November. We're working through a few final technical comment resolution and responses between the Army and Joel's team and cleaning that document up, and so expect to have that here to WDNR within the next month, I'd say. And then they'll review the proposed plan. Essentially, you've all seen the RIFS. So the FS lays out the alternatives. So the proposed plan is an articulation of what the Army proposes to do. So we're selecting an alternative and proposing that we move forward with that. So WDNR will have the first stab at that, and then once we have a good feel for where they stand on it and have resolved any issues there, we will have a public comment period. So we'll open it up to public comment. We'll publish that in the local newspaper. It'll be a 30-day period, and that's where you guys will have the opportunity to look at that document, ask any questions, outlay any concerns. We'll have a specific public meeting for that document itself. So oftentimes those are like poster board sessions where we walk through and explain what the proposed remedial action is, the cost. There's 9 criteria we typically evaluate: effectiveness, time frame, all those good things, and you guys will get to weigh in there. And at that point, once we have kind of a collective agreement on the path forward, the Army prepares what we call a decision document, and that is a document that the appropriate authorities within the Army sign, documenting that that's our selected remedy, and so then it authorizes the resources to move forward with that implementation of that remedy. So, yes, sir.
What is the Army legal really doing with this proposal? Are they just wordsmithing, or what are they doing?
So they look at it, and this goes back, I don't know the full history with all the previous iterations of this, but obviously the Merrimack groundwater system, things like that, is making sure we have the legal authority and capability to sign up for this remedial action. So they're looking at it to make sure that the Army has the authority, essentially, to spend the dollars that we need to implement this remedial action.
But there's alternatives in this.
There are.
You didn't get it down to one.
Well, yes. So the plan is one alternative. So the feasibility study outlaid a number of alternatives. The proposed plan is the one alternative. So that we are proposing. Now that could change, obviously, with input from you all and WDNR. But the proposed plan is down to one potential.
No, it's the very top one, the anaerobic.
Just doing that.
Yep.
Okay, so they're not considering a water district. No.
Go ahead, Laura. Can you hear us?
Yeah. I wanted to ask that right away that the public comment period be extended to 60 days rather than 30. I'm thinking particularly local government having time to have meetings. The RAB may wish to have a meeting in 30 days is going to make that pretty difficult.
No problem. We can absolutely accommodate that. That's no problem.
Thank you.
That'll help with the TAP, because we'll need time to get that set up and meet, and then discuss with our TAP consultant. Does he think this is a good idea?
Right. Absolutely.
When will legal got this on November 29, 2022. When are they going to have it finished this year?
Well, they approved it on November 29th. So they had it for a couple of months, and they finally approved it at the end of November.
Reviewed rather than approved.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Right. It's been reviewed and approved. Yes. From an Army legal perspective. That's right. Yeah. So any further questions on the groundwater remedial action, proposed plan, path forward? If we could, it'll just depend on how it all works out and time frames, but hopefully we'll have a public meeting and comment period here in the spring. So we're close to that. Right. Just a couple of other updates of actions ongoing. So we've got our second 5-year review kicked off back in October and is scheduled to be complete this summer. So what a 5-year review does is evaluates all the remedial actions that are in place already. And it takes a critical look at those to determine whether they are still protective or not. So you get a protectiveness determination out of the 5-year review. It's either protective in the short term, which means it may not last long, or it's not protective. And so we have a third party come in and look at our remedial actions and make a determination. I will say that they are looking for, as part of this process, they interview people, so they'll interview Michelle as the RAB co-chair, but they're also looking for other people who are interested from the community in being interviewed. So if you are interested, and they asked us specifically this morning to brief this during the RAB this evening, if you are interested, please get with either Quan or Dwight after the meeting and make sure they have your contact information, and we can provide that to the team working the 5-year review. But they'll reach out to you and interview you and get your input as part of that process. So it's done by a contractor. The Corps of Engineers lets a contract, and the contractor's name is Dawson. And make sure they have your contract. Okay, sorry. So yeah, it's an effort done by a contractor as a third party look. It's not currently working on the site.
So just to review, they'll be looking at the caps, right? Absolutely. And what else?
So looking at the caps, they'll also be looking at our groundwater monitoring program, which you could argue that we technically don't have our final remedial action in place. But we have taken some actions like the former groundwater treatment systems, the and the MERM. So they'll look at how effective those were in our overall groundwater monitoring program. Technically, Gruber's Grove Bay has had 2 remedial actions instituted through dredging a couple of times. So they'll look at that and obviously determine that's not been protective to date. And so it's an effort to critically look at those things and make sure we're not missing things and just doing things and forgetting them and moving on. So it's a part of the CERCLA process and required by EPA.
Michelle, they also look at the landfills that were recently closed.
Yeah.
So they do look at the plans, what's being done. They've asked for all the monitoring data so they can review it separately, making sure that people are doing what is being requested of the DNR. That's part of their review.
And then will we hear about it here? Will we hear their reports?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, good. Thank you.
More questions?
I was wondering if the 5-year review reports are submitted to DNR.
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you.
Will they be looking at any of the prospective work, such as the settling pond work or the PFAS, or will that not be looked at for another 5 years?
Yeah, 5-year reviews are specifically for where you've taken an action. So if we're still in the investigation phase, which we're still, PFAS is just now coming on board, and we haven't instituted any action. Technically, the settling ponds, I think they could look at because we did do some soil removal actions there.
In the meetings, that they were going to be looking at that already.
It won't be comprehensive as what we're looking at today as far as, identifying new contamination because we haven't put in a remedial action to address that, from the fire and things like that. And then the second thing on this slide is the community involvement plan. So Army does updates typically to the community involvement plans every 5 years, and it's really a document to make sure, as we talked about somewhat during the administrative meeting, that we're meeting you all's needs as far as how we're communicating and making sure the word gets out to the appropriate entities and the public at large. So I think there was a flyer on the front desk when you checked in. So they are looking for community input as well as part of that community involvement plan. So if you're interested in supporting that and being interviewed for that, please let us know. But that's a document that basically tells us, in large part, how you all want to be communicated with, and we institute a plan. And so if social media is the way to go, or a traditional paper advertisement's the way to go, who to contact and when, some of the town boards that we've talked about earlier tonight, those will all be documented in that plan. And so please take advantage of that opportunity and leverage that to make sure we're communicating with you all as best as possible. So any questions on the 5-year review or community involvement plan? Right. So just a couple of quick updates for actions we're currently working that are in the acquisition process. So we have got a contract effort going for the settling pond, site inspection, which includes Final Creek, and we hope to have that here awarded in the spring. So we've completed all there's about 15 documents that go along with every acquisition we do. So it's a scope of work and a government cost estimate, and all kinds of supporting documentation that our contracting offices leverage to put the acquisition out on the street for contractors to bid on. So we're in the midst of that process now, and I think we'll have an award here in the spring to move forward with that. So it'll also include a site-wide groundwater monitoring plan, which I think will be a key document that you all could leverage going forward in the future. It will certainly be invaluable to us within the Army. So this is a plan that documents what wells are sampled and when, for what analytes, what frequency, and just really has a comprehensive look of everything that happens at Badger as far as recurring groundwater monitoring. So that is within that current contract action that's being worked. And then PFAS remedial investigation for the propellant burning ground. So we briefed, I think it was in August, that the screening levels for PFAS had changed. So EPA had issued new screening levels, and the Army, in response to that, did a secondary look at the potential PFAS sites or areas of concern at Badger, and based on data that was collected during the previous site inspection, we did bring one site back into the program. We had claimed no further action for all the sites on Badger, but the propellant burning ground did have one sampling location that exceeded the new screening level. So we will move to a remedial investigation for that site, and we're currently working a contract action for that with the intent to award that in late FY23. So our fiscal year ends in September, so it's on track for award prior to September. So just speaking to that, and I know Laura's expressed some concerns on that. So currently the DOD policy for PFAS, the lifetime health advisory that DOD recognizes is 70 parts per trillion. So that's where we have authority to take action, and there's an impact to human health. So the site at Badger has 18-19 parts per trillion is what we found. So 70 would drive us to take immediate action. So if we find anybody that could be drinking water with 70 parts per trillion or above of PFAS, we would take immediate action and sample their drinking water wells and provide bottled water as soon as possible. Right now, the levels at Badger are far below that, so we're just going to take the next steps per DOD and start and make sure we have a full nature and extent investigation done to ensure we have the full picture of PFAS contamination that's currently present, and if we find anything, we'll continue to move forward in that. But right now, it's well below the 70 parts per trillion. And then the final action we're working on is at Landfill 5, where we've just got some areas that have settled over time. The landfill cap is settled and causes ponding, and which could lead to erosion or uncovering of landfill materials. So we're working to get Spec Pro a contract modification to execute that work here in the near future as well. So.
Okay. Randy, you have to unmute yourself.
Could you speak to what is included in the settling pond site inspection activities?
Yeah, so a site inspection is the goal of a site inspection is presence or absence of contamination. So the settling ponds were previously investigated. There was some removal actions done of soil where they dug up the soil and removed it off site, I think 10, 12 years ago. And then the site was closed out in concert with WDNR. Obviously, the fire that happened a couple of years ago brought to light that there's still residual contamination in place, and so the site inspection will look at all of those areas, the settling ponds and Final Creek, to determine whether contamination is present at levels that exceed a screening level. And so if there is, then we would move into a remedial investigation that determines nature and extent and any potential risk from that contamination that's in place. So does that generally answer your question, Randy?
I mean, you are going to be collecting samples throughout the settling ponds.
That's correct.
Just to follow up, it's the settling ponds 1 and 3, the fire was in settling pond number 2. Is there a reason 2 is not listed? Yeah,
we've already done, in large part, the sampling at settling pond 2, and so we've already established that there is contamination present at settling pond 2, so that will move forward to a remedial investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
The Army helicopters use Badger. Do they land on any of the property, or do they stay above the ground?
Don't land on the property.
So that's current?
Current, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the question was, do the
current Army helicopter operations ever land on Badger, or they just overfly the area? And I don't know.
So inside of the fenced area of the landfills out by Rocket, they have a weight that they can pick up with some kind of attachment, and that's what they're practicing, is picking up that heavy concrete weight.
Do you know where that weight is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they haven't moved it.
I don't know. Maybe, if they pick it up, they just leave it in that same spot. And then, but they never, that I know of, they never land officially on the ground. But we do talk to them occasionally, and they've cleared their spot out of brush because they need a sight line. That's on DNR property, but it's inside of a fenced area that the public isn't supposed to go.
But it's near the
old landfill, the recent landfill.
Near the landfill.
Yes.
Joel, they were landing on DSC property by 810. Are they no longer landing out there?
I am unaware of. I don't get to see that area that much, so.
I don't, since we put up gate fees, it's too much of a hassle.
I don't know where else. They have toured different parts of Badger throughout.
Yeah, they had been landing between Settling Pond 1 and the woods that are right by gate 10 in that grassy area next to the field.
I'm not sure if you all were able to hear, but yeah, everybody could hear? Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to point out, for this PFAS investigation, they did use monitoring wells that were on Badger for their previous investigation, and so any monitoring well on Badger that existing can already be used for this new remedial investigation that the contractor will be doing. So they don't necessarily have to go install wells on their own. They can use whatever is existing on site.
Part of the first phase of the contract will be to put together a work plan and so identify what wells that are already in place will be leveraged and if any new wells are needed to determine nature and extent of any PFAS contamination. Yes, sir.
So there was one location where the level for PFAS had exceeded the new EPA standard. Do you know where that location is?
Yeah. Let's see if we can go back to a map here. Oh gosh, let's see. It's in kind of the near the.
It's going to be pretty far. Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. So I have this map here. It is right here. Okay, read the numbers on this, but we can send out the report. So, but it'll identify. It's in this general vicinity.
Yeah, that's where the old magazines from Truex are still located. It's that road. I think that's the wellness that they had tested.
Historical evidence that we used PFAS at Badger so we're not real sure. And it's pretty low levels, in all honesty, but we'll kind of try to get to the bottom of what's causing the contamination and if there's any prevalent contamination across the site.
That has the Army Environmental Division or Command knows that's an inquiry that we've had for the farm because that is a concern for us because it does bioaccumulate and the threshold for it in milk is something like 1 part per trillion now. So there's very low tolerance. So
you guys use the groundwater at that site?
Our groundwater is about where that arrow is currently. That's what will feed the new farm, the new dairy. The old dairy is outside of that area.
I told years ago, I told Mike Sitton and Brian the same story. They used to practice up at Badger with fire departments from like Baraboo, North Freedom, Sauk City, Prairie Sac. And I don't know, they said they never used PFAS at Badger, but I don't know if those people didn't come in here and use them here because they have airfields. And they have had airfields and did have airfields back when I worked at the plant and saw those guys come in there. I knew some of them that went down there and did some of their practicing. But I don't know what they did. But it could have been with the fall.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Do you recall where those practice areas were?
Well, they had one that was kind of in a field up by the warehouses, by the powerhouse in that area. There's a big field out there. It was right beside the old fire.
Oh, yeah, it's just behind our office. That's the area. They investigated that area before with monitoring wells and soil borings. So we pointed them exactly to the spot where they were.
Nothing was found.
But I don't know if they used other places up there too.
I am not aware of that either. I was not there yet.
But I know that they did do practicing with other fire departments up there because I knew some of the guys that did it.
Definitely, just the PFAS is a moving target. EPA is stated publicly that they'll likely issue an MCL for PFAS in the fall. So things are changing constantly in that arena. Just because, as we did with the one site where we declared it no further action and then brought it back into the program and are continuing to take action at the site. Things could change, and as new information evolves and develops, certainly there's a large chance for change as we understand more about these contaminants and what they can do, and as policy and law changes as well. Okay, and this gets to the meeting dates over the next year. So again, I think is everyone still amenable to the quarterly meetings? First month of the quarter, the third Thursday. So that seemed to work well. So we'll plan on those dates unless we hear otherwise. And Laura, I know you had some comments, so we'll turn it over to you for the comments that you mentioned at the beginning of the brief.
Thank you. I'm inviting individual members of the Restoration Advisory Board to sign on to a resolution that would call on the DNR to expand environmental testing requirements for explosives and other contaminants at Badger. By way of background, as you know, a routine prescriber of vegetation was conducted by the DNR, and it ignited an underground fire that burned in August 2020. Despite millions of dollars on cleanup, residual soil contamination still poses a risk to human health and the environment. The underground fire happened on land that is now owned by the state of Wisconsin and includes a series of interconnected settling ponds that received industrial and sanitary wastewater during the plant's active productive years. Between 2019 and 2012, the Army removed 71,500 cubic yards of contaminated soil. The fire occurred within the 5.4-acre settling pond number 2. 1 month after the fire, the DNR issued a letter to the Army requesting response action to include soil testing, describing the incident as producing multicolored smoke and high-intensity flames. Soil sampling in June 2021 detected 2 forms of DNT, 2,4 and 2,6, at concentrations as high as 87 milligrams per kilogram, exceeding the DNR-approved soil cleanup goal of only 11. So that's 87 as compared to 11.4 milligrams per kilogram. According to the EPA, DNT is considered toxic to most organisms, and chronic exposure may result in organ damage. So now to the current day. Even more concerning is that the total concentration of DNT in soil may actually be higher than what the Army currently reports. The DNR has still not required the Army to test contaminated soils for the additional 4 forms of DNT that we're all familiar with: 2,3, 2,5, 3,4, and 3,5 DNT. They are all present at Badger, and all 6 forms of DNT have been found in groundwater at levels exceeding Wisconsin's groundwater enforcement standard of 50 parts per trillion, and that standard is for the sum total concentration of DNT. The Army's 2013 site investigation also identified dozens of other contaminants that right now do not have enforceable soil cleanup goals, including benzene, dibutylphthalate, ethyl ether, mercury, nitrocellulose, naphthalene, aluminum, and diphenylamine. However, even though they don't exceed state standards, or there are no state standards in the permitting, EPA Region 5 soil screening levels protecting wildlife suggest that unregulated contaminants may be problematic. For example, mercury concentrations at the settling pond are reported as high as 7.2 milligrams per kilogram, far above the ecological soil screening level of only 0.1 milligrams per kilogram. And more recently, groundwater sampling at the southern plant found the recently detected elevated levels of PFAS. These forever chemicals are a concern because they do not break down in the environment, can move through soils and contaminate drinking water sources, and build up, which is bioaccumulate in fish and wildlife. So this is by way of background. And I brought this up before, but I thought it might be helpful to decision makers and our legislators and to our congressional representatives to voice collective support for improved testing. The resolution language is, as a member of the Badger Restoration Advisory Board, I urge the Wisconsin DNR to order expanded soil and sediment testing for all 6 forms of the explosive DNT at and near the former Badger Army ammunition plant, and to identify and enforce protective cleanup goals for all known and suspected contaminants, including PFAS, mercury, and asbestos. I've already heard from Chris Hansen, who's in support of Roger Heidenreich. Of course, I, as a representative of CSWAP, I don't know if I have everybody email, but I sent it out yesterday. But we know all 6 isomers of DNT are in the groundwater and are affecting private drinking water wells and threaten public water supplies. But without this soil data, we have no sense of contaminant mass. We cannot, if we don't know what the contaminant mass is, it's impossible to know the risk. It's not asking for anything unusual. The state of Wisconsin has already decided in terms of groundwater and drinking water to look at total DNT, but for soils at Badger, they're only testing for 2 who not have data, and that's the first thing we need. And this may be our last opportunity to even look at the settling ponds again. The fire brought this forward. This is an issue. There's a concern. There's obviously tremendous amount of contamination left that it would actually catch on fire and be a sustained fire. So I'm inviting all of you. I'm going to leave it open for co-signature for another week. But consult with your organizations or your local government that you're represented and contact me directly, and then we'll make sure that that is circulated, including to the DNR, because Army has said they're not going to voluntarily do this, so we need regulators to support the call for a complete investigation. We need all 6 tested, and I appreciate your time. I know it's kind of a long meeting, so thank you.
So none of this is being done now, is that what I...
Correct.
Those isomers. And why not?
There are certain requirements that
follow. So if we don't have a regulatory requirement that leads us, then we don't have authority to spend the dollars on the cleanup action. So
And this comes from the DNR?
it could come from any number of sources, but EPA could set a standard, WDNR could set a standard, so DOD could set a policy, but at our level we follow those things.
I mentioned it last time, but I did have a conversation, this with Randy Serrar, and at the time of this fire, he had wanted to do complete testing of all 6 isomers of DMT. So I understand in the past, when we did this how many years ago, when we were looking at cleaning it up, there was a lot of pushback from both the Army and the DNR. They did not want to do all 6 isomers. I really think it's time to do it. I really do. We're doing it in the water. The stuff that's in the soil is going to get in the water. It's not chaos. That's what, seeing Laura's, what she just read, when I saw that yesterday, got me thinking. That's why I asked a question about contaminants in the groundwater from the settling ponds, because there's nothing to prevent anything that's in the soil from getting down into the groundwater. And that's been our problem at Badger. So, one of our problems. So why not? I know money, but, I just passionately plead that we do this. We have an opportunity right now.
Sure. No, understood. And Laura, too, I know you and I and others have had pretty extensive conversations looking into the rationale in terms of sampling isomers, sampling this, sampling that, talking about lab qualifications, the regulatory requirements, like you're saying, what the authorities are, where they fall. So I'm hopeful that those conversations are also being expressed with members of the RAB too, and that information is being shared. That said as well, absolutely with the petition, if people sign that and get it our way, we're always open to listen, and we'll take the efforts, bring in partners that are needed to have those difficult conversations and try to walk through rationale and see what those suggestions are in terms of the want from the public, and then what we're able to do regulatorily within our, legal framework and our authority.
So this is not brand new.
No, we discussed it before. They chose not to do it. DNR chose to accept the dirty land when there was a transfer from the Army. This was a fight we had, and it's ancient history, but it is what has happened. So let's just be smart this time. Let's do our due diligence. That's my opinion. I would encourage all of you, if you agree to let Laura know, sign on to it. If you don't, that's fine. But the more people who say we want the testing for all of these 6, isomers of DMT, we have the people with the voice right now, right? I would highly recommend you do it unless you want to. But we don't want another fire. We don't want another explosion. We don't want more stuff in our groundwater. We don't know where the groundwater is flowing. We don't know what it's going to impact. We know it's dirty. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had that explosion.
I think that, kind of ties into Roger's comment. At the beginning of our meetings, we see less and less people attending these meetings, and part of it is because what is said and requested is pretty much ignored. And what's the point of being involved if your involvement has no impact?
But I've been doing it forever because I believe we have an impact. But we won't if we don't sign on. So let's do that. I encourage you to do it.
Politically, what would force the DNR to adopt standards themselves?
Politically?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what politically would be involved in that type of thing, but typically when standards are developed, we have a standard making team that looks into the science. Typically we work in concert with DHS or other partners to use science-based rationale to propose those standards, and then at that point it goes through Natural Resource Board, and then up to the legislature, and then back down for whatever approvals there are. So politically, in terms of DNR involvement, there's no politics behind it.
Right, but the process you described is the path to take this resolution.
Typically, when new standards are developed, that's the pathway that I was describing.
If it becomes a state standard.
That's how you would develop that state
But you could still suggest that to the Army, correct? Even if it isn't a state standard?
Well, within our regulatory framework, we're only allowed to, encourage cleanups essentially that fall under those codes that exist, essentially. So we can't force the Army to do anything that's not within our regulatory authority.
But the state could enact legislation saying this is a contaminant, it should be investigated.
Well, and I'm not sure how that would apply. I don't work for the legislature.
Yeah, it happened with the drinking water. It went to being a total DMT. That was a change.
Sure.
And so the same thing could happen with soil.
Have we invited our legislators to come to this meeting?
We invite them all the time. But this is a time, if you feel passionate about it, call them. Let them know we have a little bit of power.
If we don't do it now, it won't happen.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
And I think
if I may, there's two things that we're discussing. One is enforceable standards, but in this case it would be a site-specific standard where they would look at risk, and DNR has the existing authority to do that, to establish. So would not require Natural Resources Board to do anything, it doesn't require the state legislature to do anything, and there's specific criteria when establishing cleanup goals for soil, like risk to terrestrial ecosystems, risk to groundwater, risk through direct contact. So DNR has the authority, and the Army has refused to do that, so we need to ask DNR to impose remediation goals that are protective, particularly of groundwater and surface water. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's no action tonight, correct?
Right.
No, if you want to sign on to that resolution as a RAB member.
In our email, because I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's in your email. If it's not.
It came from C-SWAT.
Yeah, from Laura at C-SWAT.
Pardon me?
It came from CSWAB, I think is what it's called. Citizens for Safe Water on that. That Laura founded that 100 years ago.
That's a long time ago.
I will also send it to Kate so she can send it out to her list to make sure everybody gets it.
But I think I agree. We as a board have been a little more passive in listening, which is okay because we're learning. We have a lot of new people. But this is one of those crossroads times when we have an opportunity to actually do something. So let's do that.
Coming up on time for the
Any other questions, parting comments? All right. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you again in April. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.